Folk tales are old and busted, aren't they? It's the kind of stories that weren't written down for a reason, and that's because they put kids to sleep. So why should you read them? Here's why you should. The Snow Woman and other yokai stories from Japan, folk stories are simply old stories, like antique stories, like pre-internet stories, that are from your grandfather's 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 grandfathers, like thousands of years old, if you come from a culture that has that much culture, that long of a pedigree, to have folk tales that are that old. Japan has that long of a history, thus the Snow Woman. And the reason this is fascinating is because they're stories that still resonate with people today, regardless of where you are, because they've got the same threads. You've seen some of the Korean horror films, and they have those threads that are from, stop me if you've heard this, Korean folk tales, if you're familiar with Korean folk tales. The Snow Woman simply is Japanese folk tales, and it's a collection of 77 Japanese folk tales that are in very, very short form. And I say very short form, meaning that the longest one is about 3 pages long. Yeah, so even you reluctant readers that don't like to read, which is probably most people, most middle school kids, maybe most high school kids, that's you, because you think it's too long and it's boring. Just like folk tales. You'll love this book. And it's got that cool Japanese factor, because high school kids love Japanese things. They do. This book is awesome. It's even got some pictures in there. Just a couple of pictures, but you don't go to the Snow Woman for the pictures. You go there for the slight sense of dread in their 2 to 4 page stories. This is not horror. This is dread. I'll even call it light dread, because it's folk tales. Most of the stories have a lesson of sorts, but it's the kind of lesson you would expect from, again, stop me if you've heard this, a folk tale. But that's where the book is interesting. It's not going to be everybody's jam, and this is not going to be the kind of book that you want to read from cover to cover, because some of the stories get a little bit repetitive, but that's because they're folk tales. You say to yourself, I've heard this before. I've heard the American version, I've heard the Korean version, I've heard the South African version, because they translate well from one culture to another. And this is a fascinating look at Japanese culture. It's The Snow Woman, and it's going to be a great little cultural read for those in middle school all the way through high school.